Who were these men who dared to defy the most powerful king on earth? Why did they refuse to kneel when thousands bowed in fear? And how could they stand unshaken before a furnace blazing hotter than the desert sun? Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. To the world they were captives, exiles taken from a conquered city. But to God, they were chosen, witnesses who would reveal his power in the very heart of a pagan empire. The story begins decades earlier, with the fall of Jerusalem. The once proud city of David trembled as the armies of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon swept across the land like a flood. Siege ramps rose against the walls. Soldiers shouted as battering rams pounded the gates. Flames devoured houses, and the cries of the people echoed through the night. The Holy Temple, the place where God's name had dwelt for centuries, was stripped of its treasures. Golden vessels and sacred articles were carried off as plunder, paraded through the streets of Babylon in triumph. Among the captives marched in chains were 4 young men of noble birth, handsome, intelligent, and strong. Their Hebrew names carried meaning and faith: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But in Babylon even their names were taken from them. Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah became Shadrach. Mishael was named Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Each name a reminder that their identity now belonged to a foreign king. And yet, though Babylon could strip away their names, it could not strip away their faith. The city they entered dazzled the senses. Towering ziggurats rose into the sky, their steps painted in brilliant colors, crowned with gold. Massive palaces stretched across courtyards filled with carved lions and winged bulls guarding every gate. The Euphrates River flowed through the city, feeding lush gardens that seemed to hang in the air, waterfalls spilling from terraces high above the streets. Priests in ornate robes lifted incense before idols of wood and stone, their chants echoing through the temple halls. To many, Babylon was the center of the world, the jewel of civilization. But to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it was a land filled with temptations, idols, and trials that would test the very core of their devotion. They were trained in the language, the science, and the wisdom of the Chaldeans. They dined at the king's table, studied under his scholars, and walked in the shadow of his throne. Their rise was swift, for God's favor rested on them. When Daniel interpreted the king's troubling dream, revealing mysteries that no Babylonian wise man could uncover, Nebuchadnezzar honored him and promoted his friends as rulers over the provinces of Babylon, from captives to leaders. Their journey seemed a miracle, but in the courts of kings, favor is fragile and loyalty is always tested. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego lived each day surrounded by idols, expected to bow with the crowd, to blend into Babylon's ways. Yet they refused to compromise. Still, even they could not imagine how fierce the test would become. A day was coming when the loyalty of 3 men would be set against the pride of an empire. A day when the fire meant to consume them would instead proclaim the glory of their God. The test of fire. King Nebuchadnezzar's empire was vast, stretching farther than any kingdom before him. From the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Persia, from the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia to the coasts of the Mediterranean, his rule was unmatched. But though he had conquered nations, his greatest enemy was still within, his own pride. In the arrogance of his heart, he devised a monument that would declare his power to every tribe and tongue under his dominion. On the broad plain of Dura, where thousands could gather under the open sky, he commanded that a statue be built, a colossal image of gold, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Day after day, under the scorching sun, workers labored to raise the gleaming figure. Blocks of gold were polished until they shimmered like fire. Craftsmen carved every line with precision, and layer by layer, the idol rose into the heavens. When at last it was finished, it towered over the land, its golden surface reflecting the rays of the sun so brightly that men shielded their eyes. From miles away, travelers could see it rising like a mountain of gold. It was not just a statue, it was a symbol of Nebuchadnezzar's greatness, his wealth, and his demand for absolute devotion. The king sent heralds throughout his empire with a decree that thundered across nations and peoples of every language. This is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. The command spread like fire. From every province, officials, governors, judges, treasurers, and soldiers journeyed to the plain of Dura. Merchants came in caravans, priests in their robes of scarlet and gold, soldiers in shining armor. Tens of thousands gathered, forming a sea of people stretching as far as the eye could see. The day of dedication arrived. The golden statue loomed over the crowd, casting a shadow that reached across the plain. Nebuchadnezzar himself sat on a throne, clothed in royal purple, his crown blazing with jewels. He looked upon the multitudes with satisfaction. This was his empire, united in fear, bound together by his word. Then the signal was given. Musicians lifted their instruments. Horns blared, flutes shrieked, harps trembled, drums thundered, and the sound rolled like a wave over the assembly. At once, the crowd fell to the ground as one. Thousands dropped to their knees, foreheads pressed against the earth, bodies bent in submission. Dust rose in clouds as the multitude worshipped the golden idol. From a distance, it looked like a field of grain flattened by the wind, but not all bent their knees. In the midst of the crowd, 3 men remained standing: Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Their backs were straight, their faces lifted to heaven. They neither bowed nor trembled. Whispers rippled through the kneeling masses. Heads turned, eyes widened. Look at them. They refused to bow. Some tried to tug at their garments, urging them to kneel before it was too late. Others drew back in fear, not wanting to be near them when the king's wrath fell, and yet the 3 did not move. In that moment, their faith stood taller than the statue of gold. And though the music still thundered and the crowd still bowed, the eyes of Babylon had found its rebels. The music faded. Slowly, the multitudes lifted their heads from the dust, the sound of instruments echoing into silence across the plain of Dura. The great golden statue shimmered in the sunlight, towering above the crowd. Nebuchadnezzar's chest swelled with pride as he surveyed the sea of bowed bodies before him. His command had been obeyed. His glory was secure, or so it seemed, but as the waves of worshippers rose to their feet, murmurs began to ripple through the assembly. A whisper here, a gasp there. Fingers pointed. Eyes turned, and in the vast ocean of submission, 3 figures stood out like mountains unmoved by the wind. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They had not bowed. They had not yielded. Even now, as thousands rose from the ground, they remained upright, calm, unshaken. Their faces were resolute, their eyes lifted, as if fixed on a higher throne than the one Nebuchadnezzar occupied. The sight was like a spark in dry grass. Jealous eyes, eyes that had long burned with envy at these Hebrew men who had risen to honor in the empire, now gleamed with triumph. The officials who had once competed with them for influence, the advisors who resented their favor in the king's court, saw their chance at last. A group of Chaldean advisors, their robes trailing in the dust, pressed their way through the crowd. Their voices were sharp, urgent, dripping with flattery and venom. They came before Nebuchadnezzar, bowing low, their words rising like smoke. "O king, live forever," they cried. "Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace." Nebuchadnezzar nodded, his jaw set. The law was his word, and his word was unbreakable. The officials continued, their voices growing louder so that all could hear. "But there are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They pay no attention to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, nor do they worship the image of gold you have set up." The words struck like arrows. The crowd gasped. Faces turned toward the 3 men, still standing in the distance. Some stepped back from them, fearful that the fury of the king might burn anyone too close. Others whispered in awe at their courage, though none dared to speak it aloud. For a heartbeat, the plane fell silent, as if the earth itself held its breath. Then Nebuchadnezzar's face darkened, his pride pierced before the nations, his throne challenged in the sight of thousands. His eyes burned like fire as he rose to his feet. "Bring them here, at once!" he thundered. The command shook the air. Soldiers in bronze armor surged through the crowd, spears raised, shields gleaming. Dust rose as the guards pushed their way forward, seizing the three Hebrews with iron grips. But though their hands were bound, their spirits did not falter. The crowd parted, bowing low as the prisoners were dragged across the plain. All eyes followed them as they were brought before the throne of Nebuchadnezzar. The golden idol loomed behind, casting its long shadow across the ground, as if mocking the scene. There, under the burning gaze of the king and the watchful eyes of a nation, three men stood accused, and in that moment, everyone knew. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any the empire had ever seen. The throne room of Nebuchadnezzar was a place of fear and splendor. Its walls were adorned with carvings of winged lions and great battles, its pillars plated with gold that shimmered in the torchlight. On a raised dais sat the king himself, wrapped in royal robes of purple and scarlet, a crown of gleaming jewels pressed upon his brow. Around him stood generals in bronze armor, priests in their jeweled headdresses, and governors from the farthest corners of the empire. Into this court of power, the three Hebrews were dragged. Bound at the wrists, but unbowed in spirit, they stood before the throne with calm faces and steady eyes. Their presence was small compared to the majesty of the hall, yet something about them radiated a strength deeper than any earthly throne could offer. Nebuchadnezzar leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. His voice, deep and thunderous, rolled across the chamber. "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," he demanded, "that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" The words echoed like a challenge hurled into silence. The court held its breath. The king's tone shifted, sharp but measured, as if granting them one final chance. "Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what god will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Gasps rippled through the chamber. The furnace, the very symbol of terror, was the punishment no one dared test. All eyes fixed on the three men. Would they bow to save their lives? Would they plead for mercy? But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not flinch. They did not glance at one another in hesitation, nor did they tremble before the wrath of a king. Instead, with calm and steady voices, they spoke words that silenced the court. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." Their words carried no fear, only quiet authority. "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king." The court stirred. The boldness was astonishing. Yet their next words struck like thunder. "But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up." A hush fell over the hall. Priests glanced at one another in disbelief. Governors shifted uneasily. Even the soldiers gripping their spears felt the weight of the moment. Never before had anyone spoken so directly, so defiantly, to Nebuchadnezzar himself. For a heartbeat, silence ruled the room. Then Nebuchadnezzar's face twisted with fury, his pride wounded before the eyes of his empire. His voice thundered like a storm. "Heat the furnace 7 times hotter," he roared. The command shook the very walls, and the court erupted into chaos. The test of fire was about to begin. Nebuchadnezzar's roar still echoed through the chamber, shaking the pillars like thunder. His face burned with rage, his pride wounded in front of every prince, governor, and soldier in the empire. At his command, the furnace was to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The words themselves carried terror, for the furnace was already feared, its flames known to consume even the strongest of men. Messengers raced to the plain of Dura, where the massive furnace stood, built for smelting iron and brick, but now prepared as a tool of execution. Slaves and soldiers piled wood and coal into its belly. Bellows roared as air was forced inside. Sparks flew into the sky as the flames leapt higher and higher, a blazing inferno that glowed like molten gold. The heat grew so intense that even those who fed the fire had to shield their faces, their skin prickling, sweat pouring down their brows. Word spread quickly through the crowd outside. Thousands who had bowed before the golden image now gathered at a distance, murmuring in fear. Parents clutched their children close. Merchants whispered nervously. Soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, though even they trembled at the thought of what was about to happen. Through the murmuring crowd, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were dragged forward by Babylon's mightiest guards. Bound tightly with ropes, their hands fastened, their garments still upon them, they walked without resistance, their steps steady and faces calm. Though their bodies were restrained, their faith was unchained. As they were brought near the furnace, the air shimmered with heat. Flames licked at the sky, their roar deafening like a beast hungry for its prey. The smell of burning wood and molten tar filled the air. The crowd pressed back, shielding their eyes, unable to draw too close. Nebuchadnezzar rose from his throne, standing where all could see him. His voice, filled with fury, thundered across the plain. "Did I not warn you? No god can deliver you from my hand. Now let all Babylon see what happens to those who defy the word of the king." The soldiers, chosen for their strength, stepped forward to carry out the order. Their muscles tensed as they prepared to hurl the three men into the inferno. But the heat was unbearable. The furnace blazed with a fury unlike anything seen before. The air itself seemed to tremble. As the soldiers drew near, the flames leapt outward with sudden violence. In an instant, the fire consumed them. They collapsed, their armor glowing red-hot, their bodies scorched by the very heat they sought to command. The crowd gasped in horror. If Babylon's strongest could not stand near the furnace, what chance did the Hebrews have within it? And yet, bound and calm, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood ready. They had already surrendered their fate, not to the king, not to the flames, but to the God whom they served. The soldiers' bodies lay smoldering, and others stepped forward in trembling obedience. With a final heave, the three men were cast into the blazing heart of the furnace. The crowd fell silent, all eyes fixed on the fire. The great test had begun. The flames roared like a living beast, leaping from the furnace with furious power. The crowd shrank back, shielding their faces from the heat. The soldiers who had cast the Hebrews inside lay dead, their bodies scorched by the fire. All eyes were fixed on the inferno. Inside, the fire burned hotter than ever. Sparks flew like stars, and the air shimmered with waves of heat. The ropes that bound Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego instantly ignited, crumbling into ash. The crowd waited for screams, for the sight of bodies writhing in agony. But none came. Instead, whispers rippled across the assembly. Eyes strained against the blinding glow. Something was not as it should be. Nebuchadnezzar himself rose to his feet, his face frozen in shock. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of his throne with trembling hands. His voice rang out, half disbelief, half terror. "Weren't there three men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" The advisors, confused, nodded quickly. "Certainly, O king," they replied. Nebuchadnezzar's eyes widened, his words erupting like thunder. "Look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods." The crowd gasped. Men stumbled backward in awe. Mothers clutched their children, their mouths open in silence. What they saw defied reason, defied nature, defied the king's power itself. There, inside the heart of the flames, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked freely, as though in a garden breeze. Their garments were untouched, their hair was unsinged. The fire that had killed the strongest soldiers could not even darken the hem of their robes, and with them walked a fourth figure. His form was radiant, shining with a light not of this world. His presence commanded reverence and awe, a being both manlike and divine, walking calmly among the flames as though the fire bowed before him. His steps turned the furnace from a place of death into a holy sanctuary. The three Hebrews did not cry out, nor did they cower. They walked in the presence of the one greater than the flames, their faces at peace, their faith vindicated before the eyes of a nation. Nebuchadnezzar staggered back, his pride shaken to the core. For the first time, the king who believed himself above gods and men had to confront a power greater than his throne. His voice cracked with urgency as he called out toward the furnace. "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." At his command, the three men stepped out from the blaze. The crowd gasped again. They walked calmly across the ashes, their clothes unburned, their skin untouched. Not even the faint smell of smoke upon them. What the fire had consumed were not their bodies, but their bonds. And in that moment, the world knew. The fire that was meant to destroy them had become the stage for God's glory. The furnace still roared behind them. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood calmly before the astonished crowd. Dust clung to the sandals of soldiers. Mothers clutched their children in silence. Officials whispered to one another in disbelief. Every eye was fixed on the three men who had walked through fire and emerged untouched. Nebuchadnezzar himself could scarcely believe what he was seeing. His pride, so fierce and unyielding, faltered in the presence of such undeniable power. He descended from his throne and stepped closer, his jeweled crown glittering in the light of the flames. His voice trembled, but his words carried through the plain like a trumpet. "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants." The crowd stirred, their murmurs swelling like a wave. For the first time, the king who demanded worship for his golden image now exalted the God of Israel. Nebuchadnezzar's gaze swept across the multitudes, his face set with awe and newfound respect. He declared, they trusted in him and defied the king's command, willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. The words struck the officials like a hammer. Only moments before, they had accused the Hebrews with glee. Now, in front of the entire empire, they stood rebuked by the very king they sought to please. Nebuchadnezzar raised his arm, his voice rising above the crowd. "Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces and their houses turned into rubble. For no other God can save in this way." The crowd erupted in astonished cries. Soldiers struck their spears to the ground in salute. The governors and satraps bowed their heads, their fear shifting from the wrath of the king to the power of a God who had proven himself greater than fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood silently, their eyes lifted to heaven, not basking in the king's praise, but in the quiet assurance that they had remained faithful. They had bowed to no idol, and in return, God had honored their courage before nations. Then Nebuchadnezzar, still shaken but resolute, gave one final command. He restored the three men to their positions of honor, and more. He promoted them to greater authority than before, ensuring their names would be spoken with reverence in Babylon. But their true reward was not the titles, nor the recognition. Their reward was knowing that in the darkest hour, when the flames had risen higher than hope, God himself had walked with them. And so the plain of Dura, once the stage of pride and fear, became the ground upon which faith was vindicated. The fire had not consumed God's servants, but it had consumed the arrogance of a king. Long after the smoke of the furnace faded, the words of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego continued to echo across the empire. The God we serve is able to deliver us. But even if he does not, we will not bow. Those words were more powerful than the fire itself. They revealed a faith not built on conditions, not rooted in outcomes, but anchored in loyalty to God above all else. For many in Babylon, religion was a matter of convenience. People worshipped the gods of stone and gold for blessings, prosperity, and protection. To refuse meant risk, to resist meant ruin. But here stood three men who would rather lose everything than betray their covenant with the living God. Their faith was not for sale. Their obedience was not negotiable. This was the true miracle. Not only that the fire did not consume them, but that fear did not control them. Even before deliverance came, their hearts were already free. Imagine the whispers that spread in the days after. Merchants in the markets spoke of the Hebrews who had faced the furnace and survived. Children retold the story by firelight to wide-eyed friends. Soldiers murmured to one another about the fourth man in the flames. Even the priests of Babylon, though silent, felt their confidence shaken, and back in Jerusalem, among the exiles who longed for home, hope was rekindled. The story reached their ears. God had not forgotten his people, even in captivity. His presence was with them in the fire. If he could stand with 3 men before a king, he could still stand with a nation scattered in exile. The legacy of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was not political power or royal promotion. It was the testimony that courage, obedience, and faithfulness shine brightest in the darkest trials. Their example became a torch passed down through generations, reminding God's people that faith is not about escaping the fire. It is about trusting the one who rules over it. Even today, their story challenges us. What idols rise in our world? They may not be statues of gold, but the idols of wealth, status, and compromise stand tall, demanding that we bow. The question remains, will we stand even if the cost is high? Will we remain faithful even when the fire is near? The answer of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego gives us courage. They remind us that faith is not measured by what we gain, but by whom we serve. They remind us that true victory is not avoiding trials, but walking through them with God at our side, and most of all, they remind us that the fire which was meant to destroy them became the very place where God revealed his presence most clearly. Their story is not just history. It is a call. A call to stand, a call to trust, a call to believe that even in the fire we are not alone. Centuries have passed since the flames of Babylon lit the plain of Dura, but the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remains as urgent as ever. For while we may not be summoned to bow before a towering image of gold, the idols of our world stand just as tall. Today they take different forms. Wealth that promises security, power that offers influence, compromise that whispers comfort, approval that demands silence. These idols call for our loyalty, urging us to bow with the crowd, to sacrifice faith for survival, to exchange integrity for acceptance. The command may not come with the blare of trumpets or the decree of a king, but the pressure is the same. Bow or be broken. In those moments, we face our own furnace. It may not blaze with fire, but it burns with trials, temptations, and fears that threaten to consume us. It may be the heat of persecution, the sting of rejection, the weight of uncertainty, or the fear of loss. Like the Hebrews, we are asked a question: will we bow or will we stand? The story reminds us that courage is not found in the absence of fear, but in the presence of conviction. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood because their hearts belonged to a higher throne. Their faith was not built on guarantees. They did not say, "We will stand because God will surely save us." They said, "We will stand even if he does not." That is the kind of faith that changes history. That is the kind of faith that silences kings, inspires nations, and reveals the glory of God. For believers today, the story carries both comfort and challenge. Comfort, because it reminds us that no fire is greater than God's presence. Whatever trial we face, we do not face it alone. The same God who walked with them in the furnace walks with us still. He does not always remove the fire, but he always joins us in it and challenge, because it calls us to live with unshakable loyalty. It dares us to resist the idols that surround us, to stand when it would be easier to bow, to trust when it would be safer to give in. Our faith is proven not when it is easy, but when the heat rises and we choose obedience anyway. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is more than a miracle of survival. It is a vision of victory. A victory that comes not by escaping trials, but by enduring them with God's strength. So when the fires of life blaze around you, remember, the furnace is not the end of the story. It is the place where faith shines brightest. It is the stage where God reveals his power most clearly. And like the Hebrews of old, you too can stand tall and declare, "We will not bow." The fire that blazed on the plain of Dura is long gone. Its smoke no longer rises, its ashes scattered by the winds of time. The statue of gold that demanded worship has crumbled into dust, forgotten by history. But the faith of 3 men endures, for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remind us of something deeper than survival. Their story is not simply about escaping flames. It is about honoring God above all else. They show us that true greatness is not measured by thrones or crowns, but by faithfulness when faith is costly. Their words still resound. Our God is able to deliver us. But even if he does not, we will not bow. Those words are a declaration for all generations. They remind us that faith is not bargaining with God for safety, but trusting him even in danger. It is not following him for reward, but obeying him out of love. It is choosing loyalty to heaven over compromise with the world. Centuries later, when the early followers of Christ faced persecution, they remembered this story. When lions roared in the Roman arenas, when prisons closed around them, when torches lit the night with their suffering, they drew courage from the Hebrews who stood in the fire. And today, believers across the world still look back to Dura, finding strength to stand in their own trials. The legacy of these three men is eternal because it points us beyond themselves. In the furnace, the world saw not only their faith, but the presence of one greater, the fourth man who walked with them. His appearance was like a son of the gods, a heavenly figure who turned a place of death into a sanctuary of life. He was the assurance that God does not abandon his people. He was the promise that we are never alone in the fire, and that promise still holds. Whatever furnace we face, whether it is fear, loss, rejection, or suffering, God's presence is greater than the flames. He may not always prevent the trial, but he always walks with us through it. And when we emerge, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not even the smell of smoke will remain. So what lesson do we carry? That idols rise and fall, but God endures. That kings rage, but his throne is unshaken. That fires burn, but his presence protects. The story ends not with the destruction of God's people, but with the humbling of a king. Nebuchadnezzar declared with his own mouth, "No other God can save in this way." And so the fire that was meant to consume became the fire that proclaimed. This is the eternal lesson, that faith shines brightest in the flames, and that God's glory is revealed most clearly when his people stand firm. The world may demand that we bow, but heaven calls us to stand. And when we do, we join the legacy of three men who faced the fire, stood unshaken, and proved to all generations that the God of Israel is the God who saves.